You'd be surprised to hear how many so-called athletes and people who are training for their sport will go into the gym and still do the same old bro split that you'd see bodybuilders do. Now, if that sounds like you, then don't worry, because I'm going to sort you out in this video and tell you how to train in the gym properly if your main priority is performance in your sport. The way we're going to do this will allow you to A, improve your numbers in the gym, so it's going to make you faster, stronger, and more powerful, but it's also therefore going to make it more likely to correlate over to your sport, so you get the best of both worlds. So you get a good physique, good performance in the sport, and hopefully less injuries as well. So let's get straight into it. Okay, so I mentioned in the intro that a lot of people training for their sport will just go in the gym and train like bodybuilders. Now, that's not really their fault, or it's not your fault, because the reason for that is because over the past 20 years or so, the fitness industry has been dominated by bodybuilding. Bodybuilding's been the biggest subsection within the industry. So most of people's knowledge about what to do in the gym is derived from bodybuilding. So we're just waiting for that to catch up with what is actually better. Okay. Now, those of us that are in the industry will know that if you're looking to get the most performance out of you, whatever level you're at, and you can, you're looking to not necessarily train for bodybuilder. You need to be a little bit smarter than that. Okay. And that's because if you think about all the splits you can think of in your head, if you're going to think of a bro split, see one muscle group per day, are you going to think of a push-pull leg split? Okay. Or even a full body split, which is closer, but there's still an issue with that. All of these splits are thinking about muscle groups, okay? But when you're training for a sport, you need to understand what your training in that sport does to you, and it all has an effect on your central nervous system, okay? So we want to be thinking about fatigue and the central nervous system when programming a split for sports performance in the gym, okay? So we all need to be thinking about what fatigues you, because let's say you're a rugby player, and your training is therefore going to be very fatiguing the central nervous system, because you're probably going to be doing a lot of tackling, you're getting hit, there's intense sprints and a lot of them, okay? So that's going to be fatiguing. So therefore, why would I just go in and absolutely obliterate my legs in the gym the next day? So that's just not sensible. So when you put it like that, it begins to make more sense. What can fatigue you? So as I just said, what can fatigue you is your sport is one thing, can fatigue you, whether that's competition or training. Another thing that can fatigue you is your gym strength conditioning. Really good writing from me there. And another thing that can fatigue you, biggest one of all perhaps, life. Life can fatigue you, okay? So those three things can absolutely get in the way of training, so we need to be aware of them in order to program appropriately. Now, all three of these things have something in common, which is that they can leave your central nervous system being fatigued, okay? When your central nervous system is fatigued and you go and exert more pressure upon it, you push it too far, and that's when overtraining can occur. That's when the increased risk of injury can occur. That also means you're not going to be performing well on a day-to-day, a week-to-week, or even a month-to-month basis if you're continuously doing this to yourself. If you're always feeling like you've been ran into the ground from training, whether that's sport or gym, then something might be going wrong, okay? So today I'm going to teach you how to go through that. The first thing you want to think about is periodization. Now, if you don't know what periodization means, that is essentially how we look at your overall training plan. So you've got your macro cycle, which will usually be the year. You've got your meso cycle, which will be anywhere from a few weeks to a couple of months. And then you've got your micro cycle, which is usually 1 or 2 training weeks or even a day, okay? Now, most periodization is what we call linear, okay? So sometimes it can be linear or non-linear, where either the volume starts high and gets lower. As the volume gets lower, the intensity gets higher, okay? So intensity low to high, volume high to low. That's very common periodization that most people will know. It's how most bodybuilding splits will probably work as well. Now, we're going to do something called undulating periodization. Now, I don't want you to be too confused by that term. All that means is that the intensity and the volume, either or, which can be like this, up and down, up and down, up and down. This can be from week to week, or even from day to day, which is the example that we're going to use here, okay? Because, as I said, the thing I'm thinking about is fatigue. So, as you can see, we've got our week here, and this is an example of undulating periodization. And each of these bars equate to sessions. So, as you can see, the blue bars are high fatigue sessions, and the red bars are low fatigue sessions, okay? So, what could this high fatigue session be? Well, this could be your sport. So let's, for the example, use We're training for our sport on a Monday. That's a high fatigue session. Therefore, my Tuesday session, it makes perfect sense to not go too hard and slam myself doing 5x5 back squats, 80% or whatever, 85%. Okay, so that would be something a little bit less taxing. What could that be? That could be recovery, that could be some hypertrophy work, so you can still do some of that as long as you're being sensible and not going too heavy on the volume. It can be anything like that. And then we'll wait until the Wednesday or the Friday to go heavy again, okay? So then these can be big gym sessions. So you can see, if you train throughout a week, this can be, the red bars can be a recovery session or rest, either or. Obviously, if you've watched my channel before, you'll know that I think you should at least rest once a week at a minimum. Active rest, that is. Or there can just be a session that's slightly less taxing. Now we're going to go through what exercises and what makes a session more or less fatiguing after this. But I just wanted to get an idea that this strategy of using high and low fatigue on alternating days or planning it around days where you're training, to say it doesn't look so perfect as this and you train on a Monday and a Thursday, obviously we can switch that around. We can have low fatigue on the Tuesday and the Friday. You still have high fatigue on the Monday. And then depending on how you feel, you can maybe do either or after trial and error. On the Wednesday, you might be able to go away with high fatigue, or you might prefer low fatigue to sandwich your training, or you might prefer to have low fatigue after your training, high fatigue at the start. Okay, so you can play around with this. I don't want you to be thinking so strict. Everyone puts themselves in this box where it's like, I must train at this muscle group a few times a week. I must do this, I must do that, okay? You can be much more fluid with it, okay? And if you think about it, we don't have to keep the same split every week because every week might be different. During season, if you're a football player, you might be playing 3 games in a week, especially at the lower levels. You see people, when games get postponed more frequently, they play Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday sometimes. So take it week by week. Use the undulating style where we can increase training demand when we have the time and the capability to do so, but then lowering it to make sure we maintain freshness throughout the season as well, okay? So hopefully that's an overview of the main way we will periodize your training. Now I'm going to go into a bit more detail about what exercises and what makes a session high or low fatigue. Okay, so as promised, let's actually go through what is high fatiguing and low fatiguing in terms of exercises and the groups of exercises. So as you can see, I've got a immaculately drawn chart as always. Okay, so what we're going to do, we'll go through the high first. All of these things I would consider high fatigue and they're going to take a high toll on your central nervous system. Top one there, maximal effort sprints, okay? Say if you do athletics and you're doing a high volume of max effort sprints from anywhere from 50 to 400 meters, obviously that's going to be taking a big toll on you. Same goes for any sport if you're just sprinting in training as well, because sprinting is great, especially when everyone bangs on about how they want to strengthen hamstrings. Sprinting is one of the best things to strengthen your hamstrings. These are weights above 85% if your one rep max. If your one rep max is 100, then obviously anything 85 kilos and above of that is therefore going to be causing a high strain. Maximal effort jumps, if I'm jumping max height, like a max box jump, for example, maximal effort conditioning. We'll bring this over to those of you who might be doing a high rocks or anything that's got a long duration and you're working hard for, let's say, over a moderate period of time, so probably half an hour and over, max effort. Competition, obviously, when you're competing, it should be taking strain on you because you should be exerting yourself pretty hard to try and get the best result possible. And then hard training, so whether this is sport, if you're a contact sport in particular, whether you're doing sparring, if you're a boxer or anything like that, even if you're things like a footballer and you have a particular session, maybe even in pre-season. I know a lot of football teams will do a lot of running in pre-season. If you do a really hard session or you almost do the equivalent amount of time as a normal game, which is possible too, then obviously that's something that's going to be a high central nervous system fatigue, okay? Now, once you know this, it's common sense because obviously the opposite to this isn't too bad. But when we're going through low fatigue, one of the things I think about is hypertrophy and particularly the upper body. Upper body hypertrophy shouldn't take too much out of the central nervous system. Now, obviously missing on this list on either side is lower body hypertrophy. Now, it's just something you just need to be careful with. I would never suggest doing probably a pure leg session where you obliterate your legs at any point. You can spread it throughout the week and just base it on a week by week basis, okay? So depending on how you do that, it can fit in either category, hence why I've not really put it on there. So just be aware of it and just do things appropriately. If you feel like you need a low fatigue session, then you can do a little bit of low hypertrophy, but not more than 1 or 2 exercises. And obviously, if you've got a bit of time free, you can do a little bit more. Similar thing, if the weights are less than 80% of your 1RM, so obviously again, if you use the 100 kilo example, we're looking at less than 80 kilos for that lift to qualify as low fatigue. That's that same sort of thing. You can use that to when you're thinking about your hypertrophy as well. Obviously, mobility really shouldn't be taken too much out of your central nervous system. So getting your mobility work in can help recovery too. Technique or skill work, again, we'll use the example of boxers. If you just go MMA, if you're just going through specific techniques, it isn't taking too much out of you and you should be fine. If you're a tennis player, just doing some tennis serve practice, again, shouldn't take too much out of you. Low level plyometrics, what I mean by that is nothing too crazy. Things like your pogos are an example of low level plyometrics, and recovery cardio. It doesn't mean necessarily an hour just sitting there, but it could be half an hour or so, easy cardio, conversational pace, that sort of thing, just to flush out anything we need to. As you can see, I've got some things listed in the corner under the star. Now, this is the types of things that are the highest fatigue, okay? So, max speed training, whether that's sprints or anything, are the highest fatigue. New stimulus can cause things like DOMs especially, and it can cause extra fatigue. Increase in volume, it can again cause DOMs, extra fatigue as well, and then max strength work. So these things are things that just slightly fit a little bit outside of some of the things that I've mentioned that you should be aware of that can cause high fatigue. So if you notice that any of these are going to be occurring in your training, whether in the gym or in your sport, be aware of it and maybe plan accordingly. Okay, so that's all I'm going to mention today. Quick recap. If you're training for your sport and it's your main priority, in the gym you want to be doing undulating periodization, which is where we break our sessions up, focusing more on whether they're going to be a high fatigue or low fatigue session, and then working that around what you have in your sport on that particular week or month. Okay? With regards to exercises, last look at the board of some groups of exercises that might be high and low fatigue. Hopefully this makes a lot of sense, and the examples I've given will help you categorize what you're doing into those categories. As I say, a lot of the time it is actually about using common sense. So if you're not sure, I'll always give you advice. If you want to ask me if you think this is Dan, is this a high or low fatigue session that I'm doing? Is it suitable? I've got this. Just message me, and I'm not going to charge you for that. And I'll give you my thoughts on that. As always, if you like this, give it a like, etc., etc. And we're going to cover more sports performance-based things. So I really do think that people aren't aware of it. And if you are looking to improve your time in your marathon, or you're a young footballer looking to impress and get a move to a higher up club, it is important that if that's really your goal, you should be thinking about the gym as well as your sport, and not just training like a bodybuilder. So I'm going to share more topics like this going forwards, and yeah, that's it. So I look forward to seeing you all in the next video, and I hope you have a great weekend.